What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Redonkulous Gaming. Today we're going to have a quick discussion around really what Wowhead is saying the meta choices are for specific covenants and specific classes. We're going to start today with the Blood Death Knight. I've got video footage rolling from all the testing that we've done in the past for each of the 4 covenants, and then I'll bring back up some commentary that I had way back when we did the original testing. I'll amend some of it to reflect some of the updates, specifically around Death 2. But overall, if you have not seen what I'm referring to, Wowhead put out, within the last 24 hours, a stack rank of your class, spec, and then based on what you're doing from a PvE perspective, either Raid or Mythic Plus, which covenant you should be picking. So very similar to the videos that I've done in the past for tanking, where I would say, hey, for Blood DK, Kyrian is the best place to go because it feels really good because of File Serenity, blah, 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 so on and so forth, right? So I will put an asterisk next to everything that I said, and I will ask you to take the information I'm about to present to you and do the same and use your own judgment, because a lot of how people are picking or are saying they want to pick covenant abilities is that they just want to be told what is the quote-unquote best. And the problem with sources like Wowhead, as well as just all the YouTube content that's out there and really any blog posts or anything that you follow, is that you're not necessarily getting the ability to experience it for yourself to then determine whether or not it's something that fits within your playstyle. So I'm about to show you guys the table found on Wowhead, and I will also link that in the description below for you. But if you're looking at the 6 tanks today, and for the sake of this video we are looking at the Blood Death Knight, Wowhead currently is telling you that the best raid covenant is the Kyrian covenant, and the best covenant for Mythic Plus is Venthyr. Not a huge stretch, not a huge leap, a conclusion that we all kind of arrived to on this channel as well, but their reasoning for doing it, I think, is something that is somewhat irresponsible, because a lot of it comes down to developer choice. And a great example of this, so when you look at the commentary that they've posted to go right along with this table, what they're saying about picking Kyrian for raid is that the choice of covenant literally hangs on whether File Serenity allows you to cleanse bleeds in a raid. A couple of them were cleansable during raid testing. Yes, that was true back then. It is not actually true now. So the thing that came out about 9 hours ago was an update from Blizzard. And again, I'll use Wowhead as a source to keep it consistent, but Blizzard has confirmed that the Dwarf Stone form and the File Serenity no longer removes some of the Castle Nathria bleeds. It will work for some, but it will also not work for some. So the main reason in which you're being told to pick Kyrian centers around File Serenity. So then you start to question, okay, if we remove File Serenity as that signature covenant ability, and we say that the developers have made a choice to say that this only works in some instances and is likely not going to help us with our world first race, our cutting edge, whatever type of raid tier you're chasing, whether that's just AOTC, normal, it doesn't matter. But if you're picking your tank covenant ability based on File Serenity, Blizzard just came out and said, too bad, so sad. All you guys who faction changed over to Alliance, all of you who race changed over to Dwarf, this isn't going to be something that you can take advantage of in Castle Nathria. And so the developers have kind of turned that switch off, and now everyone is forced to look at this through a different light. If you're picking Kyrian because you really think that Pelagos is a strong soulbind, I would tend to agree with that. And if that's your logic and reasoning, then yes, absolutely, Pelagos is one of the strongest, and Kyrian, quite frankly, has some of the strongest soulbinds in the game as it stands today. However, the fact that Blizzard did nerf File Serenity as well as the Dwarf Stone form in Castle Nathria means that we can now open the door to the Night Fae Covenant, because Death's Due is scaling pretty darn well. Even though it's rotationally locked, it's scaling pretty darn well with single target. If you flip it over to Mythic Plus, Wowhead is now telling you that the best Death Knight Covenant ability for Blood is Venthyr. And the main reason for that is that Swarming Mist is just absolutely pumping runic power, but there are dependencies tied to that statement. And the main dependency that I would caution everyone against is that in a raid setting, or in a single target setting, because there is still plenty of single target in Mythic Plus, the runic power generation is going to feel trashy. It is not going to feel very good at all whatsoever. It's going to feel like a wasted Covenant ability unless you're tanking probably 3 or more mobs. And while I am a big fan of the passive mitigation that you get through the dodge, as well as a big fan of the runic power generation, it'll feel crazy strong situationally, and it will be 100% reliant on situation. Whereas when you look at something like the Kyrian Covenant ability, and we can zoom out and talk about the entire class as a whole, when you look at the Kyrian Covenant ability, Shackle the Unworthy, that's something that if you have at least 2 targets up, you can have 100% uptime up for Shackle the Unworthy. And it presents itself as a pretty strong dot, and ultimately is going to work pretty darn well, as you can see here, across all 3 specs. So you can make the argument of going Kyrian for Raid, Mythic Plus, as well as your off specs, because Pelagos is a strong conduit choice, a strong Soulbind, and Shackle the Unworthy can have 100% uptime if you're hitting multiple targets. Most of what we're doing in this game right now is hitting multiple targets. Most of our boss fights in Raid become multiple target fights. So Shackle the Unworthy, when you look at the longevity of the expansion, may actually pan out to be the best Covenant ability, period. Regardless of whether or not File Serenity turns out to be any good beyond the first raid tier, which I think it will be. I think once we see the first nerf to Castle Nathria, maybe they'll bring back File Serenity actually working. Maybe they'll bring back Stoneform working. Those are all things that we don't know. But when you leave it up to developer choice, where it's something as easy as turning on or turning off a function to make something worth taking or not worth taking, that's not something I'm going to roll the dice on. Now, I will tell you, I fully planned on parking my Death Knight in Kyrian because I really enjoyed the ability in Mythic Plus to keep Shackle the Unworthy up pretty much 100% of the time. I really enjoyed File Serenity because that's a class that does not have a baseline cleanse, and it absolutely helps out your healer. And then the Pelagos Soulbind is also very strong, as we've mentioned. That being said, the advantages of taking Venthyr are that your runic power generation is going to be through the roof when taking multiple mobs, and you're also going to be able to put out either more damage or more self-healing there, and again, removing the stress off of a healer or helping a group down things quicker. As far as Night Fae goes, Night Fae is still a strong single target Covenant ability, so I would say that instead of going Kyrian at this point in time, thanks to the change that Blizzard put out regarding the bleeds in Castle Nathria, if I'm going and I'm picking strictly based off of raid, I would probably actually go with Night Fae, because Death's Due is actually pretty darn fun overall. Even though it is rotationally locked, it's still very strong against lower target type fights, so single target and just a couple of targets in general, and it's not all that hard to get that stacking debuff up. So Night Fae is still very much in the game. This has always kind of been a 3 Covenant conversation for Death Knight, and ultimately all this change did for us is bring Night Fae back into the mix after it saw a couple iterations of being nerfed. And making it rotationally locked was a tough one for everyone to stomach, but overall the way that it's functioning is still something that's very strong in a raid setting or even single target Mythic Plus boss fights. So Necrolords is still lagging very far behind, still feels very much like a PvP type of Covenant ability, but overall, as you can see here, there's a lot of what the Wowhead reviewers have done, a lot of work that they put in that I agree with, you know, and those main takeaways is that Pelagos is a very strong binding, soul binding overall, and Venthyr is still a very strong option for overall throughput and runic power generation with Swarming Mist. Death's Due, again, being locked rotationally, is something that you're just going to have to be okay and very comfortable with the play style of how that works to pick that. But overall, I think I would encourage everyone to kind of break the meta, or what Wowhead or what any other source is telling you the meta is, and play to what feels good. I mean, there are things that you're going to be doing in this game that are not strictly Mythic Plus or Raid, and your Covenant ability is something that you're going to be able to use in all sorts of content. So Shackle the Unworthy, I think, is still incredibly strong, even if File doesn't end up working the way that we all want it to or expected it to in Castle Nathria. Death's Due, I think, is going to see yet another iteration change. I don't think they're fully done working through that one yet. And then Swarming Mist has been in a pretty good spot, and has been probably the most consistent of any of the Death Knight Covenant abilities to this point. So you've really got 3 viable options, whether you're DPSing or tanking for Death Knight. So I'll leave it to you guys. I'd love to know your thoughts, though. I mean, I'll go back to the table here. We'll work through the other 5 tanks as well, but overall, I strongly disagree with picking Kyrian for the sake of picking Kyrian because of File's Serenity. Again, Blizzard has proven it's too easy to turn that function on or off in a raid setting. As far as Mythic Plus, if that's what you enjoy, Venthyr is going to feel pretty darn strong overall, but you can make a case for Kyrian, and less of a case probably for Night Fae at this point in time, unless they end up reworking it again, which, again, I strongly expect that they would. So up next, we'll go ahead and do the Vengeance Demon Hunter, and we'll work our way down the list, and then we'll talk a little bit about the healers as well. Let me know your thoughts, guys.